Well, hello. Welcome to another session of Minnie and Me. My name is Miss Katie, and you are watching a Garden City Arts online video. Now, we're painting a cute little narwhal today, and I'm going to walk you through this painting step by step. A few things that you need to have on hand. You need to have a black canvas painted and ready to go. You need to have your paints all laid out in the order that you see here. If you don't have a kit from Garden City Arts, you can pause the video and kind of mix your colors now. You need to have some brushes. I would suggest a 1/2-inch one. I would suggest another shader. This was a wash brush, sorry. A shader brush, and I'd suggest a round brush. And you also need to have paper towels, cup of water, and some handy dandy chalk. We'll talk about why we need chalk in just a moment. So if you have all of this stuff, then you're ready to go. And we can move on to step number 1. All right, we're gonna move right into step number 1. Now, this narwhal that we're drawing, we're going to break it down into a whole bunch of little mini steps. The very first thing we're going to do is draw a hook, okay? See this kind of curved line right there? And that's gonna be the back of our narwhal. We're gonna put that in first and then build from there. So, go ahead and grab your chalk. The reason we're using chalk instead of a pencil is 1, it's going to show up better, and 2, it erases a lot easier. So if you make a mistake, you take a clean damp brush and you wash it away. Now this hook, I'm going to start it kind of right in the middle of my canvas from left to right, and a little bit above the halfway point if we divide it from top to bottom. I'm going to start with a dot right here, and then I'm going to put in my other dot just so I know where I'm ending. I'm going to put it off closer to the right-hand side of my canvas. Next, I'm going to make a big, nice hook. Okay, that's step number 1. Next, we're going to do his head. We're going to decide how wide our narwhal's body is going to be. If we put these dots really close together, he's going to have a really tiny body. If we put them farther apart, he's going to be nice and fluffy. We want a fluffy narwhal. So I'm going to put a dot right next to the top dot on my hook, and that's going to be how wide his body is going to be. Next, I'm going to make a little hill connecting those 2 dots, and that is our narwhal's head. Next, let's go back to this tail, the bottom edge of our hook. I'm going to put a dot really close together because that's how thin his tail needs to be at the very end of his body. Next, I'm going to connect this dot and this dot to make one big narwhal. It needs to be a nice, big, curvy line for a nice, big narwhal. Okay, now remember, if you feel like your narwhal got maybe a little bit too big, I feel like mine did, you can redraw your line, and then all you have to do is erase. Okay, it's that simple. It's super duper easy. Now, at first our narwhal is going to look a little weird because there's a few things we're going to leave off, like his flippers. We'll put those in later, so don't worry about them too much right now. We are going to do his tail. Now, I'm going to put a dot on the left and the right hand side of the end of the narwhal's body. However wide you spread these dots, that's how big his or her tail is going to be. You could even do one up a little higher if you want. I'm going to do that. So one dot makes kind of a diagonal line. Do you see that? It's a little bit higher than the other. And then his flippers will be not perfectly straight. Okay, I'm going to connect these dots to his tail in one nice sweeping bowl motion. Do you see that? That's the bottom part of his tail. Next, I'm going to put a dot in the middle right here, and that's where his 2 little fins on his tail are going to meet. I'm going to do a hill connecting this dot to that dot, and same on the other side. Okay, he has a tail nail. Now let's give him his horn, which makes him a narwhal. I'm going to put a point at the top of his head, and then I'm going to connect that point down below the top of his head. I'm going to do 2 nice straight lines that create a bit of a triangle. After I have those 2 straight lines that make a very, very tall, thin triangle, I am going to put a curvy line on the bottom, and there's his horn. Okay, once I erase that line out the middle, that looks pretty good. Okay, now the other thing that I need to do, I'm going to clean up my chalk a little bit. This will happen on black canvas. It'll be harder to get rid of the chalk, but that's okay. You can always take a paper towel and wipe it off. Okay, if you're having trouble with that chalk, don't worry. It will come off eventually. And now that I've cleaned up that chalk a little bit, I'm going to draw his mouth and his belly. Those are the only two things we have left to do on our narwhal. For his mouth, I can put a little dot, and that can be the corner of his mouth. Then I do a curved line and another curved line, and there we have it. We have a narwhal mouth. Okay, next I'm going to do his belly. His belly is going to start right underneath his mouth, and it's going to be a nice curvy line that has two little bumps that ends kind of in the middle of his body. Do you see that? And there we go. We have a narwhal. Okay, now let's look at the outside around the narwhal. Let's go ahead and draw some bubbles. When we draw bubbles, they're very simple. We start with a basic circle, and then in order to make it look like a bubble, we put little curvy lines inside. Now you can have one curvy line and a dot, or you could even have maybe two curvy lines if your bubble's nice and big. Okay, I want you to start adding some bubbles, and some of them need to be big, some of them need to be small. Maybe some are just little tiny dots, okay? Just little white dots that are off in space. And you can even have some bubbles going right off your canvas if you want, maybe a really big one. Ooh. Okay, go ahead and get your background how you want it, and then we'll move on in just a moment. Now that we have all of our prep work done, we're going to start painting. We're going to use color number 1 and color number 2. The first is a light purple, that's what we're going to use for his body. And the second is a white, and that's what we're going to use for outlining the bubbles, outlining his horn, and outlining his little belly. Now, we're going to be using a lot of small brushes because there's a lot of little tiny details to this painting, and we have to work in little tiny areas, which are good for little tiny brushes. So, before you do anything, you're going to take your brush. This is the shader brush, the little tiny one. You can also use your little round brush today. You'll use that one quite a bit too. And you're going to dip it in paint water and then pat it dry. This makes your brush nice and cool and damp to the touch, but it shouldn't drip when you press it against the palm of your hand, okay? Shouldn't drip any water. So, I'm going to talk to you about brush technique really fast. This is the most important part of this video. First, if you grab a glob of paint, can you see that? A glob of paint. It's going to be really hard to make nice clean lines. So instead, you're going to take just a little bit of paint on your brush. If you need to, if you get a glob, wipe it off on your foam plate, okay? That's all you have to do. If you notice your paint is scratchy, dip your paintbrush in paint water and mix that paint water into your paint on your palette. So what we're doing is we're adding water to the paint, and it's going to act a little bit better. It's going to be easier to use. Too much water and then it'll run everywhere. So if it runs on your palette, it's going to run on your painting. So get a little bit of water mixed in. Next, let's talk about how to use our brush. If we hold our brush straight up and down, it's going to make a nice clean line because we're using the very top edge of our brush. If we hold our brush more flat, we're going to use the side of the brush, and that's going to fill in area, okay? So top of the brush makes nice lines, side of the brush fills in area. We're going to outline first, that's going to be our guide, and then we'll fill in with the side of the brush. So outline with the top edge. If you decide that it's really hard using this brush, switch over to your round brush. Remember to prime it by dipping in paint water, and then you can use the very top edge of your round brush to make a very thin line. Now you have to press light as a feather. The lighter you press, the thinner the line will be. The harder you press, the thicker your line will be. And do you see how it kind of flattens the paintbrush? That's not always a good thing to do, okay? So try to press really light. Okay, so we're going to outline first, and I'm not going to paint inside my horn. I'm not going to paint inside the mouth. That would be bad. And I'm not going to paint inside his belly. So I'm outlining all of those areas. Then I'm going to outline his body so that I know where to stop as I'm painting. So I'm outlining really fast. You can go slow and do a better job, okay? I'm just doing this really quickly so I can show you the next step. You outline first, and then we're gonna fill in with the side of our brush. I'm gonna speed up the video and I'm gonna do that really, really quickly, and then we'll talk about what to do next, okay? Go ahead and get your narwhal nice and solid and paint it in. Okay, my narwhal is nice and solid now. I'm gonna swirl my brush in the paint water, tap it on the side of the can, and then pat it dry. Swirl, tap, and dry, and I'll have a clean, happy brush. Now, if your narwhal has a few little tiny areas where the black paint is showing through a little bit, no worries. Acrylic paint is best when used in layers. Let the first layer dry, go back, and paint a second layer in just a little bit. Next, we're going to move on to our white, and let's very quickly paint in his belly and his horn. We're using the same techniques, so remember, just use a little bit of paint on your brush, control how much is on there. Use the top edge to outline, and we'll want to outline, go right up to where you left off with the purple. You don't want to leave any space in between, or else there's going to be a weird black line, okay? The underpainting or the black of the canvas will show up. And then fill in. So I'm going to do that really fast and speed up the video. Okay, we have a belly and a horn. Now, swirl, tap, and dry that brush. If you've been using the shader brush, go ahead and set it to the side. We need the round brush because we have to paint in some bubbles. Now, when we are painting in bubbles with the round brush, remember it's all about pressing really nice and light and using the top edge of the brush. If you need to, mix a little bit of water into your paint. That's going to make your life a lot easier too. So I'm going to start with the top edge of my brush, and I'm going to follow right along my chalk lines, and I'm going to make as thin of a line as possible. Now, if you don't make a perfectly thin line, that's okay. That means that your bubble will just have more room for the color that we're going to add back on in a little bit. So that means your bubble is just going to be more colorful, and who doesn't like colorful bubbles? So don't stress about it too much. Go ahead and do the details on the inside as well. And I'm going to go and do all of my bubbles. Now I'm going to show you a really quick technique that you can use if you have trouble making these little tiny dots. Use the back end of your brush, the butt of your brush, and you can use it to dot on little tiny dots. I'm going to do that right along his body. You have to have a lot of paint to do this, just FYI. Get a whole bunch of paint on there. And I'm going to do little tiny dots right along the narwhal's body. Okay, there we go. You can also use the front end of your brush to do that. I personally like using the front end of my brush. It's a little bit easier to control, but it's up to you and what you choose to do. Okay, I'm going to speed up the video and I'm going to paint in all of my bubbles, and then we'll stop in just a moment. Okay, I have all of my bubbles done. The other thing you could do before we move on is just come back in and do a second layer of paint wherever you feel like it needs. The white on your narwhal is probably going to be the area you need to focus on the most. However, there might be a few areas in your light purple that need a little touch up as well. So go ahead and do that second layer, and then we will move on to all the fun details that we're going to be adding to our narwhal in just a moment. All right, we need to let our narwhal dry for just a little bit. So while the narwhal's drying, we're going to move on to the bubbles. We're going to use colors 3, 4, 5, and 6, and maybe even this purple as well to make all of our rainbow bubbles. So go ahead and get the lids off of those guys. We're using yellow, red, kind of a bright aqua green, and a regular green to do these. Now with the bubbles, we're going to keep some of them warm colors and the rest cool colors. So warm colors are orange and yellow and red. You can make orange by mixing these two colors together on your palette. Cool colors would be blue, greens, and purples. So I'm going to use my round brush, and I'm going to start with a little bit of red on one of these bubbles, whichever one you feel like should be a warm colored bubble. And I'm going to go right over the top of the white. Now you'll notice that the red really only shows up wherever the white is. So if you go a little bit outside of the bubble and get some red onto the black, it really doesn't show up. So it'll only show up really where your white of your bubble is. I'm doing just a little tiny part of the bubble in red. Next, I can mix my own orange by taking a little bit of yellow and a little bit of red and mixing it on my palette. And I'm going to put some orange on the sides where I left off from my red. And then I can swirl, tap, and dry and end with yellow. Just some bright, straight yellow. Now, I can also come into the center and add a little bit of yellows or reds or oranges to the little reflection curvy lines inside my bubbles. Okay, so just like that. That's how we're going to do these bubbles. So, same idea, but with cool colors, you can do on the other bubbles. These little tiny white bubbles, you could fill in with color if you want, or you can leave white. It's up to you. I'm going to speed up the video and I'm going to start filling in my bubbles. One trick, so you don't have to wash your brush a whole bunch, I would suggest doing all the blue that you plan on doing first, then swirl, tap, and dry your brush, then do all the green, then swirl, tap, and dry your brush, and so on and so forth. If you want to use all of the colors and make a rainbow bubble, say on this big one, you can do that, no problem. I'll do that on this one right now, and I'll speed up the video so you can watch it. Okay, all of our bubbles are done. Now let's turn our attention to the horn. We're going to use just regular yellow and we're going to fill this horn in solid. You can use the round brush or you can use your shader brush. Personally, I like the shader brush because it has a bit more support. Oops, now this is a good lesson. Don't put your hand on top of your canvas unless you know the paint is dry. If you accidentally get paint outside the edge that you want it, no problem. Take a clean, damp brush. The brush should be pretty dry. And then you can kind of pick up the paint and move it going back and forth back into the area that you want it. Okay? All right, so let's go ahead and fill that horn in with yellow paint, and then we're ready to move on to our next step. So go ahead and get those horns filled in. Moving on, we are going to paint in some more details on our narwhal now that his body is dry. So let's talk about an eye. We need to put in a nice round circle for where his eye or her eye is going to go. It should be underneath the narwhal's horn and above his or her mouth. Next, let's put in some flappers. The flappers are kind of like his arms. We are going to put in these little triangles. One is going to go behind his body. The other one is going to connect this light purple to the edge. So we're going to put in a little flapper right there as well. Okay, it might be hard to see, but that's okay. You kind of know what to do. So we're going to take the first color, the light purple, and we're going to quickly paint in those flappers and get those out of the way. Then we'll turn our attention to the eye. So we're going to paint in a nice little flapper. You can kind of outline. Remember, if your paint is dry and scratchy, which mine is doing, that means it needs some water mixed into it and it'll act a lot better. It won't fight you. And I'm connecting his body to his arm, and it's covering up his white belly. Okay, I think that this really starts to come together once the flappers are in. It's hard to visualize without flappers. He just kind of looks weird, like a little worm in the sea. With flappers, it looks more like a narwhal. Okay, and then I'm going to paint this back fin and make sure that it stops when it reaches the white, because it's the arm behind him where we can't really see where it goes, but it still connects to his body. Okay, so I have the fins done. I might have to do a second layer of paint. I can do that later. Next, let's use the round brush and let's paint in the eye. We need color number 7, which is actually not really a color at all, it's black. And we're going to grab some black paint and we're going to paint in a round circular eye. That's going to be the eye for our narwhal. Now, when we just do a black layer of paint, it's going to look a little weird. He looks a little scary. But when we swirl, tap, and dry our brush and grab some white paint, we can paint in some reflection lights, and that will make your narwhal look a little bit less scary. We're going to put in a big circle at the very top. Make sure you don't have any water in your brush. I had water in my brush and it just got on my canvas. We want more paint, less water. Okay, I'm going to do a nice big circle for the eye. Then I'm going to do a smaller circle right below it, and then a curvy line, and there we have it. There's my nice bright narwhal eyes. And remember, if you need to, you can take paint off by using a clean, damp brush. You can also cover up paint by putting another layer of black paint on top, okay? There's lots and lots of ways that we can fix this. This way was easy. Anytime you clean off the paint with a clean, damp brush, it's going to be easier. When you paint over it, it causes issues. So I would suggest trying to erase the paint with your brush before you try painting over. Okay, we have an eye and we have fins. That's all for this step. Oh, I lied. We also are going to take some of this white paint and we're going to put some details on the narwhal's horn. We're going to put little diagonal lines. Remember, don't put your hand on your canvas unless you know it's dry. We're going to put little diagonal lines that cross from one side of the horn all the way to the other for little ridges on the narwhal's horn. Don't worry if it's not perfect. It's just a nice little added detail. And there you have it. We have rings on his horn. We're ready to move on to the next step. All right, this is our very last step. We're going to use color number 8 to add some more details and just outline and kind of make our narwhal pop. Now, all of this chalk that's left behind, I wouldn't worry about it too much. What I would suggest doing is letting your painting dry completely and then taking a clean, damp paper towel and wiping all that chalk off. Before we do that though, let's do the last step. We're gonna take our round brush, we're gonna take paint number 8, and we're gonna create some nice thin lines. So remember, mix a little bit of water into your paint, use the top edge of your paintbrush, and don't press hard. You press hard, look what kind of a line that makes. It's nice and big. We don't want that big of line though. We want thinner lines, so we're gonna press lighter, okay? So I'm gonna grab my paint, and the very first thing I'm going to do is I'm gonna put a little curvy line right at the corner of his mouth. That is for the little happy smile of our narwhal. Next, I'm going to outline in certain places. So his mouth, I want to make pop, so I'm going to outline his mouth. I want to outline his belly. This also helps hide any like little places that you may have made a mistake on. For instance, maybe your line is a little unsmooth. You can just cover it up. Now, you can also use this purple paint to outline the tail, to outline the belly, really whatever you feel like needs outlined. You can outline the whole narwhal, or maybe outlining isn't your thing, making really small lines is difficult for you, then only outline little tiny places, okay? Little tiny areas, just like maybe the mouth, maybe just the belly. I would leave the horn alone, don't outline that. And maybe just focus maybe on the tail, maybe add a few more lines inside the narwhal's body. Maybe make it darker on his belly, okay? Or outline just his fins, just to make those stand out a little bit more. It's really up to you what you outline and what you don't outline, how much or how little. Either way, I bet your narwhal is super duper cute, and once you remove the chalk line, he gets even cuter, and he just really starts to pop and look really nice. So, I hope you had fun painting. Take your time on this last step. Don't rush yourself. Remember, let your paint dry first, and then wipe off your chalk. And I hope you have a good rest of your day. See you all again very soon.